It began as a whisper in the ice, a change so slow no one would have noticed if anyone had been there to see it. The earth had been thawing, rivers bursting free, the sky bright again after thousands of frozen years. Then, something turned. The warmth that had cradled life began to fade. A winter, vast and sudden, descended upon the world, and no one could explain why. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. The story of the Younger Dryas begins with a contradiction. Around 14,700 years ago, the last ice age was ending. Ice sheets that had once buried half the continents were retreating north. Sea levels were rising. Mammoths were wandering across grassy plains, and humans had begun to settle into small communities, learning to tame wild grain. The planet was thawing. Everything was shifting toward life. But then, almost overnight, the warmth collapsed. Temperatures in Greenland fell by more than 10 degrees Celsius. In less than a decade, the climate of the northern hemisphere was thrown back into glacial conditions that would last for more than 1,000 years. To the slow rhythm of the earth, this was a scream. The ice cores tell the story like a heartbeat, a gentle rise, then a cliff. The molecules of ancient air, trapped in frozen bubbles, carry the memory of that fall. You can almost hear it. The sudden silence after warmth. What could have done it? That question has haunted science for decades. For years, the easy answer was meltwater. Vast lakes formed by retreating glaciers, like Lake Agassiz in North America, had grown so large that when their ice dams broke, they released unimaginable torrents of fresh water into the Atlantic. The theory goes that this disrupted the great ocean conveyor, the Gulf Stream, which had carried warmth from the equator to the northern seas. Without it, Europe froze, but the numbers never quite fit. Even with those floods, the cooling was too fast, too global, too simultaneous. Cores drilled from Antarctica showed it too. A sudden pulse in the same window of time. A planetary reaction, not just an accident of geography. And in that uncertainty, another question began to grow. What if the cold did not come from Earth at all? Scientists studying sediments in Greenland, the Great Lakes, and the North Atlantic found something strange. Microscopic beads of glass, soot, and platinum, tiny shards of impact melt, melted silica, black carbon, chemical fingerprints of fire. Buried in the soil of that transition layer was a black line, a thin smear marking the boundary between worlds. To some, it was evidence of a catastrophe that came from the sky. The theory is still whispered with caution in scientific halls. Around 12,800 years ago, perhaps a fragmented comet or asteroid entered Earth's atmosphere, exploding above the massive ice sheet that covered much of North America. The heat from that airburst could have ignited wildfires across continents, darkening the sky, releasing plumes of soot that blocked sunlight. If true, it would have been a brief apocalypse, an inferno followed by centuries of frost. Yet, if this happened, no one was left to record it. No writing, no legend, no inscription survived from that moment. Only the silence in the data. Only a line in the ground and a drop in the temperature curve. Somewhere in the middle of this story, humanity nearly vanished. The great animals of the Pleistocene, the mammoth, the mastodon, the giant ground sloth, all disappeared. Archaeologists find their bones scattered in layers just beneath that same black line. Burned, broken, fossilized in the instant of a change. The world shifted, and everything familiar to it was gone. Imagine the sound of that shift. The winds thick with ash, the horizon dimmed by a sun that could not pierce the dust, the cold creeping down from the north, each year harder than the one before. Rivers locked under ice, grasslands turning to tundra, whole generations of life reduced to memory. The planet itself seemed to have forgotten the promise of warmth, and yet, in that desolation, something persisted. Scattered human groups survived. In caves and river valleys, they watched the seasons bend out of shape. They saw animals vanish and the sky change color. What stories did they tell to make sense of it? What words could carry the fear of watching a world end, when no one yet knew that worlds could end? The Younger Dryas is a name for a flower, the Arctic Dryas, which bloomed again as the cold returned. It is almost poetic how scientists named this catastrophe after something that tried to live in spite of it. But names are only labels on silence. They do not tell us why. Modern researchers measure isotopes, carbon particles, ice bubbles, and sediment layers. Yet the event remains unresolved. Some dismiss the impact idea, calling it coincidence. Others see the data as too precise to ignore. Each year, new evidence appears, then disappears again in debate. A trace of iridium here, a spike in nanodiamonds there. Patterns that suggest something extraordinary, always just beyond proof. It feels almost as if the event itself resists explanation. As if the truth was meant to blur. Like heat waves on ice, in the stillness of ancient Greenland, 2 miles beneath the surface. Cores of ice tell us the exact ratio of gases, the timing of volcanic dust, even the scent of old air. And still, in those perfect layers, there's a gap. An instant of transformation that no graph can explain. One moment, the Earth was healing. The next, it was falling apart. To scientists who spend their lives studying gradual change, such a sudden reversal feels wrong. But what if it wasn't the climate that shifted first? What if something deeper changed? The Earth's pulse, its magnetic balance, its position relative to unseen forces. What if the freeze was not just temperature, but memory? An erasure written into the planet's breath. We like to think we understand time. That history unfolds in neat progression, one era feeding the next. But in truth, time has always been fragile. It folds, fractures, forgets. Perhaps the Younger Dryas wasn't only an environmental event. It was a moment when the continuity of the world itself broke. When everything that was known was wiped clean, leaving only the faint echo of how warmth once felt. And maybe that's why we keep returning to it. Not for data, not for proof, but for the silence inside it. Because deep down, the story of the Younger Dryas isn't just about the Earth freezing. It's about how close we came to disappearing with it. When the ice returned, it was not gradual. It came like breath over glass, spreading across continents. Forests vanished under frost. Oceans slowed. Skies cleared to a brightness that felt hollow. Then, slowly, life began to adjust. To wait. Somewhere in that stillness, the planet learned how to sleep again. And when it finally woke, 12 centuries later, nothing was the same. But before that awakening, before rebirth, something dark had already begun to settle into the soil. A clue, waiting to be found. The black dust of fire and ice. The layer that should not exist. The trace of something that fell from the sky. Beneath the grasslands of North America, in a thin stratum of ancient soil, lies a mystery no one expected to find. It is no thicker than a whisper, just a few centimeters of blackened dust that divides one world from another. Above it, the bones of a new Earth, smaller animals, new vegetation, the signs of recovery. Below it, the remnants of giants and warmth. The line between them marks not just time, but catastrophe. When archaeologists first unearthed this dark horizon, they thought it was a sign of local fire. But soon, they began to find it everywhere. Across the Great Plains, through Europe, into the Middle East, even in South America. A global scar, synchronized to the same geological instant. About 12,800 years ago, the moment the Younger Dryas began. Within that soot lay clues too strange to ignore. Microscopic spheres of glass, particles of carbon fused by extreme heat, nanodiamonds no bigger than a virus, and an abundance of platinum, rare in the Earth's crust but common in meteorites. It was as though the sky itself had burned and rained down its ashes. The Younger Dryas boundary layer, as it came to be known, is one of the most disputed pieces of evidence in modern science. Those who study it speak of it with both reverence and exhaustion. Every sample tells the same story. A sudden, simultaneous deposition of burned matter and impact signatures. Yet no crater large enough to explain it has ever been found. The event seems to have come from nowhere, leaving everything changed, but leaving no wound visible on the surface. Some researchers imagine a comet breaking apart in the sky, scattering fragments across the hemisphere. Others picture an explosion above the Laurentide ice sheet, so immense it melted thousands of square kilometers of ice in seconds, releasing enough water to drown the coastlines and choke the oceans. But others see coincidence, data cherry-picked from chaos, the desire to find a pattern where there is none. Still, the soot remains. The black dust persists, and with it, the quiet insistence that something happened. If you hold a sample of that layer under magnification, you can see the gleam of microtectites, droplets of molten rock flung into the air and cooled as glass. Their surfaces are perfectly smooth, as if licked by flame and frozen mid-flight. Inside, trapped bubbles of air tell the story of a world in shock. The ratios of oxygen and nitrogen, the sudden spikes in iridium and platinum, all align with signatures of extraterrestrial material. And yet, the deeper question is not just what struck the Earth, but what else it erased. Because above that layer, the archaeological record falls silent. Cultures that once thrived across the North American continent, the Clovis people, vanish abruptly. Their tools disappear. Their art ceases. For years, scientists thought they had migrated or simply adapted to new prey. But when the black layer was dated precisely to the same moment their camps vanished, the story began to shift. Maybe they hadn't adapted at all. Maybe they had been extinguished. Was it the climate, the comet, or something larger? Something that moved through the planet like a shadow and rewrote its memory. The sediments hold their breath. Radiocarbon dating shows massive wildfires ignited almost instantly across continents. Charcoal residues cover millions of square kilometers. Trees burned so completely that the air's carbon isotope ratios changed for centuries. A black veil of smoke may have dimmed sunlight for decades, cooling the planet, silencing the photosynthetic engines that fed both beast and man. It was an apocalypse of light, born of fire, ending in ice. Somewhere in Greenland, a single layer of ice captures the moment precisely. There is a sharp increase in acidity, sulfuric aerosols from something immense burning. A dip in oxygen 18 isotopes, proof of plummeting temperature. Then, beneath it all, microscopic metallic grains not native to our world. The fingerprints of cosmic dust. What makes the discovery haunting is its repetition. The same layer, the same chemical anomalies, appear in far corners of the globe. In Syria's Abu Huraira, a settlement frozen in time, grains of impact glass were found embedded in ancient plaster, melted sand that had once been walls. The people there had seen something bright enough to melt their homes into glass. Yet, when the findings were published, controversy followed like a shadow. Reviewers dismissed it as coincidence. Labs replicated the data. Others could not. Journals hesitated, withdrew, republished. The scientific world split down the middle. Each side, convinced the other, had surrendered to myth. But if myth and data point to the same horizon, what then? Throughout history, civilizations have remembered cataclysms in metaphor. The flood of Gilgamesh, the Egyptian texts of fire descending from the heavens, the Hopi stories of a blue star. The Greeks spoke of Phaethon, the son of the sun, who lost control of the chariot of fire and burned the world before being struck down. What if these were not parables at all, but inherited memories of that same burning sky? Modern science is cautious with memory. It trusts what can be measured, replicated, peer-reviewed. But the black layer remains physical, immutable, unignorable. No matter how often it is debated, it does not vanish. Like an old wound beneath the skin, it insists on being felt. Some researchers have noticed patterns in magnetic grains within that layer. Tiny particles of iron aligned in directions that suggest the planet's field may have been disturbed. If an impactor was large enough to vaporize over ice, could it also have shaken the magnetic shield itself? Could cosmic debris have altered the balance of the atmosphere and the field that protects it, leaving Earth briefly naked before the sun? If that happened, even for days, the radiation would have been fatal. DNA damaged, seeds sterilized, species blinking out of existence in silence. And yet, the layer also tells a quieter story. Mixed among the soot are pollen grains, proof that even after the inferno, something survived. The Dryas flower, cold and small, took root again on barren tundra, its petals catching the first fragile light. Life always waits, even beneath ash. When geologists run their fingers across that layer, they are touching the exact moment the past fractured. It is both tomb and threshold. The black dust is not just residue. It is memory made mineral. It reminds us that every surface we walk on was once the ceiling of someone else's world. And so, the mystery deepens. Because if the Younger Dryas boundary marks a global event, then its trigger should be written somewhere larger than soil. Somewhere in the stars, perhaps. In the long orbit of something that once brushed our sky and will one day return. But no one knows. And the more we study, the less certain we become. Science, for all its precision, has always feared the randomness of fire. It prefers slow ice to sudden heat. But the Earth's history may not share that patience. Perhaps what we call catastrophe is simply the planet's way of remembering what balance costs. So we stand before a thin layer of ash and glass, and we call it evidence. But to the Earth, it is something else entirely. A sentence written in dust, the language of endings and beginnings. Beneath it lie the voices of warmth and megafauna. Above it, the cautious whispers of a new dawn. Between them, only silence, and in that silence, perhaps the faint echo of something still falling. They say extinction is slow, a gradual fading, a curve that softens into absence. But sometimes, it happens all at once. A collapse so quick that even the Earth seems startled. Around the time the black dust settled and the Younger Dryas began, the great beasts of the Pleistocene vanished almost overnight. It was as if something had passed through the world. Something cold, invisible, and absolute. And the breath of giants simply stopped. Across the frozen plains of Siberia and North America, their remains still lie preserved. Hair intact, flesh unrotted, eyes half open in a kind of eternal bewilderment. Mammoths, mastodons, woolly rhinoceroses, ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, all caught mid-motion as if turned to silence by an unseen force. Some were found standing upright in the permafrost, grass still undigested in their stomachs. Scientists say the temperature drop was sudden, violent, and lethal. It wasn't the kind of winter you could prepare for. It was the kind that ended everything. What could kill so much life in so little time? The traditional answers: overhunting, disease, gradual climate shift, field too gentle, too human. The data shows a pattern far more abrupt. Around 12,800 years ago, radiocarbon records show simultaneous megafaunal collapse across continents. The mammoth herds of North America disappeared within centuries, perhaps decades. In South America, the giant sloths and glyptodons followed. In Europe, reindeer and woolly rhinoceros populations plummeted. In Australia, long after the pattern would repeat. It's as though the planet carries a rhythm of sudden erasure. But the mammoths were different. They had survived countless glacial cycles before. Their thick coats, high-fat diets, and migratory instincts had carried them through millennia of cold. They were built for ice. And yet, during the Younger Dryas, a period colder than most ice age intervals, they perished. Why? Some scientists argue that the very thing that had made them thrive became their downfall. When the comet fragments or airbursts struck the Laurentide ice sheet, shock waves may have vaporized kilometers of ice and soil, spreading clouds of soot and microscopic glass across the atmosphere. The fires that followed would have poisoned the air. The sudden darkness and freezing would have stripped vegetation. Megafauna, with their enormous appetites, starved quickly. The food chain fractured from the top down. Others claim it was more than environmental. Traces of heavy metals found in tusks suggest contamination, perhaps from airborne toxins, perhaps from cosmic material. There are even patterns of microfractures in bones that resemble those caused by barometric shock waves, as if the atmosphere itself had compressed. And yet, in some places, there are clues that make the story stranger still. Near the Yana River in Siberia, explorers found mammoth remains blackened as though burned, not decomposed, not weathered, but charred from the inside. In Alaska, frozen carcasses show traces of liquid water suddenly refrozen around them, as if the ice had melted for moments, then seized again. There's no natural explanation that fully fits. Some call it coincidence. Others whisper that something passed through the atmosphere. An energy burst, radiation spike, or plasma event that scorched one hemisphere in an instant. If you look closer, extinction lines are never random. They appear like echoes. Around each one, there's a story of silence. The Clovis people vanished at the same time as the mammoths. The black layer settled. The forest burned. The cold returned. It's as though life on Earth had been reset to zero, and only fragments of memory were allowed to survive. In the ruins of that memory, new species emerged. Smaller, lighter, faster. The age of megafauna gave way to the age of adaptation. Where once stood mammoths and saber-tooths, soon walked humans carrying spears of stone, tools of necessity born from loss. Survival had replaced abundance. And still, the question remains, why was it so sudden? Core samples from Alaskan loess deposits show pollen changes within less than a decade. Forest ecosystems collapsing and tundra reclaiming the land almost instantly. Volcanic eruptions can't account for the global reach, nor can gradual orbital shifts. The Younger Dryas had the signature of an external pulse, not an internal drift. Something like an electric jolt to the planet's climate system. When ice melts, it tells its story. In the deepest cores of Greenland, scientists have traced isotopic fingerprints of atmospheric dust that match impact materials, platinum anomalies, magnetic spherules, microtectites. But what matters more is the timing. Each signal aligns precisely with the extinction curve, as though a single event had written its echo across the biosphere. It's tempting to think of the mammoths as victims, but perhaps they were messengers, warning carved in bone. Their disappearance marked not just a climatic boundary, but a turning of the human story. After them, we stopped wandering entirely. We began to build, to store, to defend against what the sky might bring again. Civilization, in its quiet way, is born from fear. The mammoth became myth. In some Siberian legends, they were not animals, but underworld spirits, creatures that lived beneath the ice and died when exposed to sunlight. In North American oral histories, there are tales of the thunder beasts, herds that roamed before the great darkness, silenced when the heavens fell. How do separate cultures, continents apart, remember the same silence? Maybe extinction isn't always loss. Sometimes it's translation. The Earth speaks through what it erases. Even now, deep in permafrost, the mammoth still waits. Geneticists extract their DNA, strand by strand, hoping to resurrect them. It's a strange human impulse, to unmake the erasure, to fight silence with creation. But what if the Earth remembers differently? What if it's not meant to be undone? The ice holds them like memories that refuse to melt. Perfectly preserved, yet unreachable. When scientists open their tombs, they describe the smell. Sharp, metallic, like cold air trapped for 12,000 years. It's not death that escapes. It's time. We are taught that extinction is final. But the Younger Dryas reminds us it is not an ending. It's a crossing. Species vanish, but the world that replaces them is built on their silence. We are made of their aftermath. Sometimes I wonder if the mammoths knew it was coming. Did they feel the air shift? Did the ground tremble beneath their feet? Did they look toward the horizon, where the sky glowed faintly blue, and sense that something enormous and unseen was descending? Or perhaps they felt nothing at all. Just a sudden wind, the light dimming, the grass beneath them crystallizing into frost. In the stillness that followed, the planet exhaled. The forest smoldered. The ice crept outward again, and the last echoes of their steps faded beneath the snow. It's strange how quickly the Earth can forget. A species that lived for millions of years erased in an instant, leaving only bones to argue their existence. Yet those bones speak louder than words. They tell us that stability is an illusion, that even the strongest vanish when balance turns. The day the mammoths fell silent was not just the end of a species. It was a warning written in fur and frost, that everything can change before we realize we are part of the story being erased. And as the last warmth of the Pleistocene vanished, the fires of rebirth began to kindle in the ashes. Because when the giants fell, the small learned to survive. And from that silence, civilization began to whisper. It's difficult to imagine fire in a world of ice, yet that's exactly what the Younger Dryas gave birth to. A paradox written in heat and frost. The same event that froze the northern hemisphere may have also unleashed floods and flames so vast they reshaped the continents. For a brief, chaotic moment in time, the Earth burned and froze at once. Long before human records, before names or borders, the world held an inland ocean. Lake Agassiz. It covered what is now central Canada and parts of the northern United States. A lake larger than all the Great Lakes combined. Its waters were bound by glacial walls hundreds of meters high, shimmering under the pale sun of the last ice age. And then, something broke. At some point around 12,800 years ago, those icy walls gave way. Trillions of tons of fresh water poured into the North Atlantic in an instant. The deluge was beyond comprehension, a torrent that might have raised sea levels across the planet by several meters within years. The ocean's salinity shifted, its currents faltered. The warm waters that once flowed north from the equator collapsed, plunging Europe and North America into cold and silence. But the story doesn't end with the flood. Some researchers believe that what shattered those walls wasn't simply time or pressure, but impact. If a comet or swarm of fragments exploded above the Laurentide ice sheet, as the black dust layer suggests, it would have vaporized surface ice into steam, triggering massive melting and rapid outflow. The impact would have ignited forests, created storm systems of boiling rain, and sent shock waves through the atmosphere. The floods that followed would be both consequence and catalyst, turning warmth into frost in a matter of months. Imagine standing there, on land that no longer exists, watching the horizon turn red with auroral fire, then blue with the color of frozen mist. The air thick with smoke, the rivers roaring with meltwater that glowed faintly under an orange sky. In that storm of opposites, whole ecosystems were erased. Across the world, evidence of simultaneous burning appears. Charcoal layers in North America, soot in European peat bogs, even in Antarctic ice cores. The pattern is planetary. Fires burned at latitudes that had never known flame before. Forests combusted not just from heat, but from rain infused with nitric acid. The chemical signature of something cosmic burning through the atmosphere. And still, amid all this destruction, life persisted. The Younger Dryas was a paradoxical age of motion, a seesaw of drought and deluge, of flame and frost. Rivers that had flowed north reversed their direction. Deserts bloomed, then froze again. Some regions suffered century-long droughts while others drowned beneath new lakes. It was as though the earth had lost its orientation, twisting between extremes in an effort to find balance again. In Greenland's ice cores, the shift is instantaneous. You can trace it in the chemistry. A drop in deuterium ratios, a spike in volcanic ash, a plume of ammonium from burning biomass, then a sharp fall in temperature. Within less than 10 years, the planet flipped from warmth to winter. 10 years. The lifespan of a single tree. Scientists describe the event in numbers. Meltwater pulses, isotopic deviations, ocean circulation models. But beneath those numbers lies something visceral. The sound of the planet groaning, of ice collapsing in walls taller than skyscrapers, of rivers screaming toward the sea, and perhaps something else. In many ancient traditions, the great floods and fires come together as a single story, a reset. The Mayan Popol Vuh tells of a time when the gods destroyed an earlier humanity with fire from above, followed by floods from below. The Greeks remembered the fall of Phaethon, whose flaming chariot scorched the earth and caused the seas to rise. The Norse spoke of Surtur, the fire giant whose sword would melt the world before the next age began. In each myth, fire and water are partners in rebirth. Destruction and purification intertwined. Could it be that these stories, passed down through countless generations, are not symbolic but ancestral memory? Echoes of the Younger Dryas itself, retold until the origin blurred into metaphor. In the ancient sediments of the Mississippi River Basin, geologists find ripples of destruction frozen in time, immense wave patterns carved by floods that lasted days, not centuries. Some of these megaflood signatures measure over 30 meters high. They speak of water moving at hundreds of kilometers per hour, scouring rock to its bones. And yet, above these scars, forests regrew within decades. The world healed quickly, at least on the surface. But the trauma remained buried in stone. When the ocean conveyor shut down, Europe's warmth vanished. In places like England and France, temperatures dropped by as much as 15 degrees in a generation. Entire valleys that had begun to thaw were reclaimed by permafrost. In northern Asia, forests retracted hundreds of kilometers. Human settlements dwindled, and migration patterns changed. People moved south, seeking refuge from a cold that felt endless. The earth was trying to breathe again after choking on its own imbalance. But even in the darkest part of the Younger Dryas, there were flashes of renewal. The meltwater created new lakes, new river systems, new coastlines. The destruction seeded future fertility. Ash enriched the soil, making the next forest stronger. The same forces that ended one age laid the foundation for another. There's a haunting symmetry in how the earth rebuilds itself. It never resists catastrophe. It transforms it. Still, something in the data doesn't add up. The volume of water released from Lake Agassiz, though immense, might not have been enough to alter the Gulf Stream alone. Nor can the freshwater pulse explain the simultaneous cooling seen in the southern hemisphere. That global synchrony suggests something more complex, perhaps an atmospheric shock, or a temporary veil of dust and aerosols encircling the planet. Whatever it was, it acted fast. The transition into the Younger Dryas took less than a human lifetime, but its shadow lasted over 1,000 years. And when it finally lifted, the world that emerged was unrecognizable. Maybe that's the true nature of planetary balance. Not stability, but rhythm. A constant oscillation between creation and destruction, between flood and frost. If that's true, then the Younger Dryas wasn't an anomaly. It was a rehearsal. Sometimes I wonder if the Earth remembers the sound of that flood. If somewhere, deep beneath the permafrost, the water still moves, waiting. The fire across the ice wasn't just an event. It was an initiation. A moment when the planet tested how far life could bend before breaking. And though we walk now in warmth, the echo of that frozen fire remains beneath our feet, whispering of what happens when balance shatters too quickly. For in that age, when water and flame dance together, the world learned something it has never forgotten: that the line between destruction and renewal is as thin as melting ice, and perhaps, one day, it will be crossed again. For decades, the idea hovered on the edges of science, too strange to dismiss, too persistent to die. It began with a simple question. What if the Younger Dryas wasn't born of Earth at all? What if the cold, the floods, the fires, and the black dust were not symptoms of a slow internal shift, but scars from a single, impossible event? The arrival of something from the sky, the comet hypothesis, started as a whisper in the early 2000s. A team of geophysicists and archaeologists studying the boundary sediments noticed an anomaly. Platinum levels dozens of times higher than background, magnetic spherules fused from molten rock, and microscopic diamonds formed under pressures no volcano could achieve. The same markers appeared from North America to Syria, from the Andes to Greenland. The pattern pointed upward. It looked like the signature of an impact. But there was no crater, no obvious scar. How can the Earth be struck without being struck? The answer, perhaps, lies in the sky itself. Imagine a comet, 2 or 3 kilometers wide, moving at 30 kilometers per second. A wandering fragment of the Taurus complex. The same swarm responsible for today's annual meteor showers. As it entered Earth's atmosphere, the friction alone would vaporize it, scattering fragments across continents in a chain of air bursts. Each explosion would release more energy than 1,000 nuclear detonations. Forests would ignite instantly. Ice would melt into vapor. And shock waves would race across the hemispheres. Within hours, the sky would darken. The light of the sun would fade behind ash and nitric clouds. Temperatures would plummet. Photosynthesis would stall. And life, unprepared for such violence, would fall silent. The physics fits disturbingly well. The platinum anomalies, the soot, the nanodiamonds, all match what we find at known impact sites. Yet every attempt to locate a crater fails. Some suggest the main explosion occurred over the Laurentide ice sheet, leaving no rock record, only a void that melted itself away. Others point to craters newly mapped under Greenland's ice, such as the Hiawatha structure, an immense basin over 30 kilometers wide, buried beneath a kilometer of frozen time. But the dating is uncertain, blurred by thousands of years. The evidence lies locked under silence. The resistance to the theory is almost ritual. Peer reviewers dismiss it as pseudoscience. Funding agencies refuse to touch it. And yet, the data accumulates like an ache that won't fade. Researchers find microscopic glass spherules in Belgium, Syria, Chile, and South Africa, all dated to that same boundary. They find charcoal layers and ammonia spikes in ice cores. They find black mats rich in carbon, the calling cards of burned biomes. Everywhere, the story repeats itself. If you could watch it happen from above, it might look like this. The comet fragments enter in a shallow trajectory, streaking across the northern sky. Each fragment bursts before reaching the ground, like a string of suns tearing through the clouds. The shock waves sweep outward, flattening forests. The air ignites, ice boils. The upper atmosphere fills with water vapor and soot, creating a shroud that plunges the planet into shadow. Then the winds reverse, carrying cold down from the poles, sealing the world in sudden winter. An apocalypse of light. But there's something more haunting in this version of the story. Something psychological. Because if the comet hypothesis is true, then humanity's memory of destruction is cosmic, not terrestrial. It means the Earth's history is written not just by plate tectonics and climate cycles, but by accidents from the void, by encounters with things that don't belong here. Across myths and scriptures, the motif of fire from the heavens recurs with obsessive precision. The smoking star of the Hopi, the flaming arrow of the Aztecs, the destroyer of Egyptian texts, the angel with a flaming sword in Genesis, the pillar of fire in the Mahabharata. Even Plato's story of Atlantis ends in a single night of fire and flood, eerily close to the geological record. Could these be cultural fossils? Memories of an event so traumatic it echoed across generations. Skeptics argue that myths are not evidence, that correlation is not causation. But the more we map the planet's surface, the more these stories begin to align with physical scars. Some researchers suggest that the Taurid meteor complex, a vast swarm of debris from a disintegrated comet thousands of years ago, still crosses Earth's orbit twice a year. Its densest core passes every few millennia. The last peak? Roughly 12 to 13,000 years ago. The timing fits like a lock. And if that's true, then the Younger Dryas was not a unique catastrophe. It was part of a pattern, a recurring intersection between Earth and the wreckage of a shattered celestial body. A memory written in orbit. It's unsettling to imagine that civilization's rise may be built on the ashes of a cosmic accident. That our ancestors watched the sky fall and learned, in that terror, to build walls, temples, calendars, anything that could give order to chaos. Perhaps that's why ancient observatories align with constellations tied to the torrid stream. The Pleiades, Taurus, Orion. They weren't worshipping stars. They were remembering the day the stars came down. And yet, the deeper mystery remains unsolved. If a comet struck, where did it go? Why no crater? No definitive trace? Some physicists propose that it never touched the ground at all, that the energy released in the upper atmosphere was enough to melt the ice sheet from above, creating the floods and cooling that followed. Others wonder if the impactor's fragments burned so completely that they left only chemical shadows. There is even a hypothesis that Earth passed through the tail of a disintegrating comet, its dust veiling the sun for centuries, triggering both ignition and ice. Whatever the truth, it feels uncomfortably alive, as if the event were not just a relic, but a rhythm still beating through time. Every October and June, when the torrid meteors streak across the sky, Earth passes through that same debris field. Astronomers note larger objects hidden within it, dark, inactive comets, perhaps the parents of those ancient fragments. One, known as 2004 TG10, measures several hundred meters wide. Another, 2015 TX24, travels in a path eerily similar to the inferred trajectory of the Younger Dryas impactor. Each time they pass, they remind us. The sky still remembers. The comet hypothesis remains unproven, but it lingers like a memory the planet refuses to forget. Scientists debate, data contradicts, but beneath the arguments lies something undeniable. The elegance of its simplicity. One cause, one spark, one rain of fire that explains the unexplainable. Perhaps we resist it not because it's implausible, but because it's too familiar. We've always feared the sky, the way it watches, the way it can end us without warning. The Younger Dryas may have begun with such an ending. A light, brief and blinding that erased everything before it. And in that light, the seeds of a new age were sown. For only after the fire fell did humanity begin to build again. But somewhere in the night sky, the source of that fire still moves, orbiting patiently, waiting for its next encounter with the world that forgot. At first glance, Göbekli Tepe seems almost impossible. A temple complex so ancient it predates agriculture, rising from a barren hill in southeastern Turkey, carved with animal reliefs and aligned to the sky. Each pillar weighs tons, each ring arranged with the precision of purpose. But the strangest thing about it is not its age. It's the silence surrounding its memory. No one knows who built it, or why. And perhaps even more curious, no one should have been able to build it at all. Carbon dating places its origins around 11,600 years ago, the very moment the Younger Dryas ended. A time when the world was just beginning to thaw, when glaciers were receding and humanity was crawling out of the ruins of the Great Freeze. It stands, therefore, not as the dawn of civilization, but as the echo of something that survived it. Archaeologists describe Göbekli Tepe as a sanctuary of stone, but to others it feels like a message. The massive T-shaped pillars, carved with foxes, vultures, scorpions, and serpents, form circles that seem to mirror constellations as they appeared in the sky at the end of the Younger Dryas. The vulture stone, or Pillar 43, bears a pattern that some researchers believe represents the exact celestial configuration of a catastrophic comet strike. The carvings show a scorpion beneath a sphere, possibly the constellation Scorpio under the path of the torrid meteor stream. Around it, symbols of birds and falling discs appear as though narrating something once witnessed. Fragments of fire descending from above. Some scholars dismiss this as coincidence, but the alignment is uncanny. When the patterns are mapped onto the night sky as it would have appeared around 10,950 BCE, the correspondence is nearly perfect. Was Göbekli Tepe built to remember what happened when the earth froze? Or to warn of what might come again? To understand why that question matters, we have to look at what was happening around it. The world, newly thawed, was unrecognizable. Coastlines had shifted. Seas had risen over 100 meters, wiping out vast lowlands. In Europe, the tundra gave way to forest. In Mesopotamia, rainfall returned after centuries of drought. And in this fragile new spring, humanity began to build monuments to memory. The stones of Göbekli Tepe were arranged by hunter-gatherers, people without pottery, without metal, without written language. Yet they designed a site that encoded astronomical knowledge and symbolic sophistication far beyond their supposed time. It challenges the entire timeline of civilization. If they could carve stone circles of such precision, then knowledge must have survived from somewhere older, from somewhere before the ice. There's a theory, half dismissed, half feared, that Göbekli Tepe was not a beginning, but a reconstruction, a memorial built by survivors of a forgotten world, those who remembered the comet and the flood, who carved into limestone the story they dared not let fade. If the Younger Dryas was the great amnesia of humanity, Göbekli Tepe was its first act of remembrance. Even its burial is strange. The site was deliberately covered around 8000 BCE, entombed under tons of soil and rubble, as though someone wanted it hidden, protected, or forgotten. Why bury what took generations to build? Was it a ritual of closure or fear? Did they believe the sky would fall again? The oldest temples at Göbekli Tepe face toward the rising of the star Deneb, one of the brightest points in the constellation Cygnus, the celestial swan. In ancient myth, the swan was the messenger of souls, the bridge between worlds. If Deneb was used as a marker, it might have symbolized the return of light after the long darkness of the Younger Dryas. Or perhaps, more literally, it marked the place in the heavens where something had come, or would come again. Even the animals carved into stone may not be random. The fox, often shown with its mouth open, may represent fire or a celestial intruder. The vulture could symbolize death or rebirth. The serpent, coiling around the stones, appears again and again. The same serpent found in the myths of every ancient culture, from the Norse Jormungandr to the Mesoamerican Quetzalcoatl to the Egyptian Apophis. In the sky, it is the shape of a comet's tail. Perhaps the ancients saw the serpent descend from the heavens and burn the world. Perhaps they built Göbekli Tepe to ensure that memory would not dissolve into legend again. When researchers modeled the site's astronomical alignments, they found that its builders had tracked the slow wobble of Earth's axis, the precession of the equinoxes, a phenomenon thought to have been discovered only by the Greeks thousands of years later. The implication is staggering. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe understood the sky in a way we only rediscovered much later. It's tempting to imagine the scene. The fires of the Younger Dryas dying out, the first grass returning, the sky clear again after 1,000 years of dust. A group of survivors standing beneath constellations they had not seen in generations, tracing the stars that once betrayed them. And in that moment of awe and fear, deciding to carve them into stone, to hold the memory steady against time. The more we study it, the less it resembles a temple of worship and the more it feels like a library of stone, a record of observation, geometry, and trauma. A coded sky map, preserved beneath layers of intentional silence. But silence is fragile. Once unearthed, the stones began to speak again. When archaeologist Klaus Schmidt first excavated Göbekli Tepe in the 1990s, he called it the point at which the soul of humanity turned. He believed it marked the moment when spirituality preceded survival, when people built not for food or shelter, but for meaning. Yet meaning is often born from fear. If the Younger Dryas was an age of death and cold, then the act of building was rebellion. Every pillar raised was a way of saying, "We remember, and we will not vanish again." Still, the mystery deepens. Beneath the main rings of Göbekli Tepe, radar imaging has revealed older, yet unexcavated enclosures, deeper circles waiting under the earth. Their orientations shift subtly with each layer, as if tracking the slow drift of the stars through precession. It suggests that the builders returned over centuries, recalibrating the stones as the heavens changed, as if they were measuring something still moving. If the carvings truly record a comet strike, then Göbekli Tepe is more than archaeology. It is the earliest chronicle of cosmic memory, a bridge between the fire that ended the Pleistocene and the civilization that followed. It means that our first temples were not built to gods, but to data, to preserve the only thing that mattered: the story of what fell from the sky. And maybe, beneath its buried rings, another message still waits. Something older, darker, a warning cut into limestone, meant for those who would forget. Because if Göbekli Tepe was built in the wake of the Younger Dryas, it stands as both gravestone and prophecy, a memorial to the last time the heavens burned. And when the next comet glows in the night, a faint green shard passing silently through the void, perhaps it is not just light we are watching, but a reminder, a signal from the same stars the builders once feared, still tracing their long orbit above the Earth that refuses to remember. Long after the last glaciers receded, when humanity had already begun to build stories instead of shelters, the memory of the Younger Dryas refused to die. It lingered in whispers, in songs, in myths told beside new fires. They are scattered across continents, written in different tongues, but their skeleton is the same. A world once warm, a sudden cold, a sky that burned. And the few who survived. In the Hopi traditions of North America, there is the tale of the blue star Kachina, a celestial being who will appear when the world ends, turning the sky blue and purifying the earth with fire. The Hopi say it has happened before and will happen again. In their cosmology, humanity lives through worlds, each destroyed when balance fails. The last ended in flames and flood. The next was born in silence and frost. Across the ocean, in ancient Sumerian tablets, there is a similar story. Gods of the heavens sending a deluge to cleanse the world after fire rained down from above. The same sequence: light, fire, water, darkness, repeating across time. The flood of Utnapishtim, the fire of Atrahasis, the smoke that turned day into night. In Greece, it is Phaethon's chariot, the son of the sun who lost control and scorched the earth until Zeus struck him down with thunder. The heavens burned, the seas rose, and the land froze. The symmetry is too precise to ignore. It feels as if every civilization was remembering the same event through different eyes. The Norse called it Fimbul Winter, the Great Winter. 3 years of unbroken snow that would precede Ragnarok. In that silence of white, even the gods would feel the cold. The ancient Sanskrit texts speak of pralaya, the dissolution of the world, where fire and flood alternate in cosmic rhythm, resetting creation. The Maya told of the time when the sky fell and the waters boiled, when their ancestors hid in caves to escape the burning dust. These are not isolated imaginations. They are data, preserved in metaphor, a planetary memory recited in different rhythms. When the ice cores of Greenland tell of sudden temperature collapse, when geologists find soot and ash, when bones show a synchronized dying, the echo of these myths becomes difficult to dismiss. Perhaps mythology is not the opposite of science, But its oldest language, the memory of the Younger Dryas, was too large for words, so humanity encoded it in story. They personified the comet as gods, as serpents, as divine punishments. They remembered the black dust as ash from celestial anger. They carved its image into stone. The fox, the vulture, the serpent tail, all staring upward. The event was too vast to explain, so they sanctified it. They made meaning where none could be found. Even the Bible carries fragments of this memory. In Genesis, the flood that wipes the earth clean follows a time of violence and corruption. God's wrath descends not as moral judgment, but as reset, a cleansing of the world through water. Before that, Enoch writes of stars which transgress their order, celestial bodies cast from the heavens to destroy the earth. The book of Job speaks of fire from God that fell from the sky and consumed the flocks. The tone is moral, but the imagery is geological. Could it be that religion itself was born from survival? That our reverence for the sky began as fear of what it could do? Anthropologists trace the pattern through every culture that rose after the Younger Dryas. Myths of fire and ice, of gods punishing hubris, of floods ending an age, all share the same temporal boundary. Around 12,000 years ago, when the climate changed, when the seas rose, when the world began again, in Egypt, the ancient priests spoke of the destroyer, a celestial force that returned in cycles, scorching the land before the Nile would flood anew. In the Zoroastrian Avesta, there is the star Tistria, who battles the demon of drought, bringing both fire and flood in his wake. In Polynesia, legends describe the long night when the sky filled with burning stones, and after it, the world cooled so deeply that even volcanoes slept. What if all these stories describe the same sequence? The comet impact, the wildfires, the flood, the long cold that followed. Modern scholars resist that thought. They say the mythic imagination exaggerates natural change, that flood stories arise independently because humans live near rivers. But when the same cycle appears on every continent, when its timing aligns with known climate collapse, coincidence begins to look like denial. Even language holds traces of the event. In Proto-Indo-European roots, the word diwos, from which divine and day descend, means bright or shining. The divine was once synonymous with light, because the sky's brightness both nourished and destroyed. To worship was to remember the fire that fell. And then there is the serpent, the most persistent of all symbols. In myth, it is both destroyer and teacher. It lives in the water, crawls through the fire, sheds its skin, and returns anew. It connects heaven and earth, time and rebirth. In cosmic symbolism, it is the path of the comet, coiling through the sky, burning, returning. The Ouroboros, the serpent that eats its own tail, is the shape of Earth's cycles themselves. It is the Younger Dryas drawn in mythic form, an ending that became a beginning. What if these myths were warnings disguised as stories, preserved so we would never forget? What if every legend of divine punishment, every tale of the heavens burning, is a memory of that one cosmic night? At Göbekli Tepe, the builders carved vultures carrying orbs, perhaps souls, perhaps stars. In the Andes, myths speak of a sun that hid for generations, replaced by a cold moon. In China's oldest chronicles, the 10 suns burned the world until a divine archer shot 9 of them down. Even in Aboriginal Australian stories, among the oldest oral traditions on Earth, there are memories of the sea swallowing the land, of red fire lighting the horizon. No one civilization could have invented all this, but together, They form a map of fear stretching across the entire planet. Maybe that's what collective memory truly is. Not knowledge, but trauma preserved in poetry. The mind can't hold an event that large, so it turns it into a pattern, a prophecy, a myth that lives in the bloodstream of culture. We are the descendants of those who survived, and the stories are the aftershocks of their terror. When we read of divine fire, we hear the roar of air bursts. When we read of flood, we see the meltwater torrents. When we read of gods descending, we recall fragments of rock burning in the upper atmosphere. Every myth is a scientific report written in the language of survival. And perhaps the reason these stories still fascinate us is because some part of us knows they will come true again. The cycles of the sky have not changed. The torrid debris field still crosses our orbit. The serpent still moves. The ancients tried to remember through symbols. We try through data, but the message remains the same. What falls from above always returns. Fire will come again, followed by ice. And when it does, someone will survive to tell the story. Perhaps as we do now, softly, uncertainly, trying to turn fear into meaning. Maybe that is what myth is for. Not to explain, but to comfort. To tell us that even when the world burns and freezes, it has happened before. That memory, even when buried under ice, can still dream. Because somewhere beneath all those stories, beneath the floods, the flames, the divine anger, there is only one truth. The sky remembers, even when we forget. If you could have walked the world before the Younger Dryas, the coastlines would not have looked familiar. Great river valleys extended far beyond what we now call the shore. The continents were wider, the seas smaller, the air heavier with cold. Then, when the ice melted after the freeze, the world redrew itself in silence. The oceans rose, slowly at first, then faster, then all at once. And what had once been home was gone. Entire landscapes swallowed by the sea, leaving behind no ruins, no witnesses, only salt and depth. We call these places submerged continents. But that phrase hides their weight. Doggerland once connected England to Europe. A vast green plain of forests and rivers, rich with game and human camps. The Sunda Shelf once united the islands of Indonesia into a single landmass, stretching toward Australia. The Beringia Bridge connected Asia to the Americas, its tundra dotted with mammoths and human fire pits. All gone. In the 1,000 years that followed the Younger Dryas, the ocean rose more than 100 meters. That's not just coastline. That's history itself dissolving into water. If there had been civilizations before us, small, scattered, ancient, their memory would have drowned too. Divers exploring the seabed off India's Gulf of Kambat have found what appears to be foundations. Rectangular patterns of stone and sand dated to nearly 9,000 years ago, though some claim older. In the waters off Japan, near Yonaguni, step-like terraces and pillars rise from the deep, cut in shapes that look too deliberate to be chance. In the North Sea, sonar scans reveal ancient river channels and forest floors buried under silt, along with traces of stone tools. And off the coast of Malta, underwater ridges seem to align with the solstice sun. Most scientists are cautious, calling these formations natural or misinterpreted. But the questions won't go away. Why do so many flood myths remember lost lands that match these places almost exactly? Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria, High Brazil, all names for memory's absence. When Plato wrote of Atlantis sinking beneath the waves in a single day and night, he placed it roughly 9 millennia before his time, around 11,600 years ago, the exact boundary of the Younger Dryas. The coincidence is unbearable. Could it be that these stories were not fiction, but distant echoes of the same event? The moment when the world thawed and drowned its own past. For most of human history, knowledge was oral, passed by voice, by rhythm, by firelight. What survives from those drowned generations may have reached us only through rhythm and myth. The rising waters would have chased the coastlines for centuries, generation after generation, watching their world recede. Imagine standing where your ancestors once fished, seeing the horizon creep closer each season. The ocean was not an event. It was a hunger. There's something eerie about how uniform the sea level rise was across the planet. It happened in pulses. Each pulse followed a spike in meltwater release, perhaps from collapsing ice sheets or from the delayed aftershocks of the impact event. Meltwater Pulse 1b, they call it, the sharpest increase known in the Holocene. Around 11,500 years ago, the ocean rose by nearly 20 meters in less than 4 centuries. For those living near the coasts, it must have felt like punishment from the sky itself. And maybe it was. The Greenland and Antarctic cores suggest the warmth that ended the Younger Dryas came not gradually, but violently. Temperatures jumped by 7 degrees in a single decade. Atmospheric carbon spiked, and the great ice sheets fractured. Water from melting glaciers roared into the sea, and the land trembled beneath its own release. As the weight of the ice lessened, the crust rebounded, volcanoes awakened, earthquakes surged. The earth exhaled after 12 centuries of breath held tight. To the people of that age, it must have felt like the world was being remade. And perhaps it was. Some believe this is when memory fractured, that the flood didn't just erase land, it erased context. What had come before was no longer believable to what came after. Maybe there were settlements, early centers of trade or ritual, that vanished without trace, remembered only as legends of golden islands. Maybe the survivors who built Göbekli Tepe were not inventing civilization, but preserving it. The drowned world calls to us still. Sonar reveals ghost rivers beneath the North Sea, coral-covered ruins off the Bahamas, drowned caves in the Yucatan filled with human bones stained with ochre. In those submerged caverns, the stalactites still bear the marks of ancient fires. People once lived there. On land now 30 meters underwater, it's strange to think that our history is built on a surface that used to be air. Every shore is a boundary between the known and the forgotten. Beneath every wave lies a silence we cannot carbon date. What would we find if we drained the seas? Would we discover ruins or only emptiness? Would we confirm our myths or bury them deeper? The lost horizon has become more than a geological curiosity. It's a mirror for our own amnesia. We live surrounded by hints of what came before, out-of-place artifacts, unexplained alignments, legends of knowledge that fell from the sky. We dismiss them as coincidence, because to accept them would mean rewriting the comfort of our beginnings. It would mean admitting that history might not start where we think it does. What if civilization is not a straight line, but a heartbeat? What if it rises, drowns, and rises again, leaving only whispers each time? In the sediment layers of the Mediterranean, geologists have found thin streaks of freshwater diatoms between marine deposits, proof that, for brief moments, the sea turned to lake. The Earth itself oscillates between states, never static. Every time we think the story begins, it's already the aftermath of something else. As the Younger Dryas ended, the planet warmed by force, not grace. Floods carved new coasts. Rivers redrew their paths. Mountainsides collapsed. The world of ice became a world of memory. To the survivors, the horizon must have looked alive, an endless boundary between what was lost And what was left? The ocean would glitter like a secret. They must have told stories about the land beneath the waves, of the cities that sank, the gods who punished, the lights that burned and vanished. And those stories, softened by millennia, became myth. Even today, the sound of waves carries that rhythm. The sea speaks in repetition, like breath, advancing, retreating, returning. It remembers what it swallowed, even if we do not. When divers descend into those drowned valleys, the water grows colder the deeper they go. Light fades, colors die, and the silence becomes absolute. That silence is history itself, the sound of the past refusing to speak. And yet, the past is not gone. It only waits, perfectly preserved beneath pressure and salt, like the ice once did. The fossils of trees still stand upright on the seabed, their roots embedded in what was once soil. In the dark, their branches sway with the slow current, like ghosts of forests that remember the wind. If there were voices once, chants, laughter, prayers, they're still there too, diffused into the water, scattered through its molecules. Memory never really leaves. It just changes medium. The lost horizon is where the world began again. It is also where it ended once before. And somewhere beneath that quiet line where sea meets sky, our oldest memories still wait, patient and invisible, for the next time the land returns. Every great event leaves an echo. Some are written in bones, some in ice, and some, strangest of all, are written in the invisible lines that circle our planet. Earth's magnetic field is not static. It breathes. It wanders, weakens, reverses, and hums like the faint pulse of a living thing. Most of the time, it is steady enough to shelter us from the sun's radiation, from cosmic dust and solar wind. But during the Younger Dryas, something happened to that field. Something no one yet fully understands. In sediments taken from lakes and caves across Europe and Asia, researchers found sudden shifts in magnetic orientation precisely within that same window. 12,800 years ago, the compass of the Earth, so to speak, tilted. The north magnetic pole drifted rapidly, and for a short while the planet's shield weakened dramatically. The data is subtle but consistent. Traces of isotopes like beryllium-10 and carbon-14, created when cosmic rays strike the upper atmosphere, spiked all at once. The Earth had become transparent to the universe. What does that mean? It means the sky itself changed. More cosmic radiation reached the ground. Clouds formed differently. Climate feedback loops accelerated. And auroras, those shimmering curtains of green and violet, would have spread far beyond the poles, glowing even over temperate lands. For those who lived through it, the heavens would have seemed alive, restless, divine. A world wrapped in light. Some scientists call it coincidence. Others whisper about cause and effect, that the same impact or solar event that triggered the Younger Dryas also disturbed the magnetic core. If a comet or swarm of fragments exploded in the atmosphere, releasing vast energy into the ionosphere, it could have shocked the field, weakened it, even shifted its axis. If the sun itself had flared unusually bright, a solar proton event magnitudes larger than anything we've seen in modern times, it could have done the same. Either way, the Earth's memory was rewritten, not only on its surface, but in its electromagnetic heart. There are hints in the myths, too. Many ancient stories describe a sky filled with light before the Great Cold. The Egyptians wrote of the Eye of Ra blazing brighter than ever before it vanished. The Vedic hymns speak of Indra's thunderbolt, of the heavens cracking open. The northern tribes of Eurasia told of a serpent of fire encircling the world before darkness fell. What they described may not have been only flame, but radiation. Charged particles dancing across a sky that had lost its shield. In Greenland's ice, this magnetic memory is visible as chemistry. A rise in nitrate concentration, the fingerprint of cosmic bombardment. In tree rings, the radiocarbon anomaly stands like a scar, proof that something outside Earth's atmosphere had touched the biosphere directly. For centuries afterward, traces of that event lingered in the soil. It was as if the planet had inhaled the stars. Some researchers have begun to see patterns between magnetic collapses and human thresholds. Around 42,000 years ago, the Lachan event, a complete reversal of the magnetic poles, coincided with climate instability and a wave of extinctions. Art flourished then, as if humanity, sensing its fragility, turned inward. Could the Younger Dryas have been another such threshold? Smaller but still global. When the field weakens, the night sky changes color. Auroras bloom at the equator. Red and green veils pulsing silently overhead. Compasses spin. Migratory animals lose their bearings. Radiation increases by orders of magnitude. It's easy to see how early humans, watching those lights ripple across frozen forests, might have thought the gods were fighting, or that the world's soul had torn. What if they were right, in their own way? We like to think of magnetism as science, measurable, repeatable, cold. But it is also memory. The molten core of the Earth acts like a recorder, spinning, writing, storing its story in magnetic minerals that cool and lock into direction. Every rock layer is a page. When those directions shift suddenly, they mark trauma. The Younger Dryas is one such page, a smear in the alignment of magnetic grains, a sign that the core itself trembled. No one knows what caused the tremor. Some theories link it to massive water redistribution when the ice sheets melted. As trillions of tons of weight shifted from land to sea, the pressure on the mantle changed, subtly altering flow in the liquid iron below. The planet's balance shifted, and with it, the field's geometry. Others believe the culprit was external, a surge of cosmic energy from a solar outburst or nearby supernova. If even a fraction of that energy reached the magnetosphere, it could have destabilized it for centuries. There is a strange poetry in the idea that while the surface froze, the planet's heart was moving faster. When you trace magnetic records across the Holocene, you see that the field recovered quickly after the Younger Dryas. Within a few centuries, its strength returned. Its poles drifted back toward stability. But something else changed with it. Something in human behavior. The Great Migration patterns ended. People stopped wandering and began to settle. Farming emerged. Fire became controlled. Maybe stability in the field allowed stability in the mind. Maybe the planet's restored rhythm echoed in ours. If the Younger Dryas was a wound, then the magnetic recovery was its scar. And yet, the Earth has not stopped trembling. The magnetic poles today drift faster than they have in recorded history. North racing across the Arctic toward Siberia, south sliding beneath the Pacific. Satellites record a steady weakening of the field, roughly 10% per century. In the South Atlantic, a vast anomaly has opened where the field is dangerously thin, exposing the upper atmosphere to radiation. Scientists debate whether it signals another reversal. It would not be the first. It will not be the last. The Earth is a patient creature. It forgets slowly, but completely. Each magnetic reversal erases the memory of the one before. Each cooling and warming cycle rewrites the climate record. We, who measure time in years, cannot grasp the rhythm of its breathing. But somewhere beneath our feet, in the iron core spinning faster than the crust above it, the memory of the Younger Dryas is still moving, still faintly humming in the frequency of the field. Perhaps that is why our myths always tie catastrophe to light, why we imagine the sky glowing before the end. It's not superstition, it's cellular memory. When the field weakens, the heavens burn green, red, violet. The ancestors saw it. They survived it. And deep down, we remember the color. Sometimes, on cold nights at high latitude, you can feel that memory in the air. The faint vibration, the static whisper that precedes an aurora. It's the sound of the Earth remembering its own near death. The same charge that once froze the planet, now dancing harmlessly across the upper sky. We call it beauty, but it is really history made visible. The Younger Dryas ended thousands of years ago, yet the planet still carries its resonance. The magnetic field sways, the poles drift, the auroras flicker like neurons firing in the brain of a living world. Each shimmer in the sky is a pulse of that old trauma, transformed into color. And if you stand long enough beneath that light, if you let it fall over your skin, you might feel what those first survivors felt when the cold began to fade. That fragile, impossible belief that the storm had passed, that the light meant forgiveness. But the Earth never forgets. It only waits for the next time its heart decides to turn. After more than 1,000 years of silence, the ice began to sigh. In the heart of Greenland, layers that had once recorded only cold and dust began to trap warmth again. Temperatures rose not gradually, but in a single leap. A change so fast it looks like a vertical line on the graphs. The Younger Dryas, that age of frozen patience, was over. In less than a generation, forests returned to lands that had known nothing but frost. Rivers woke, lakes cleared, and the wind carried the first smell of grass in 1,000 years. It was not a gentle rebirth. The sudden warmth was a convulsion, as if the earth had inhaled fire after centuries of holding its breath. The ice sheets cracked and bled into the sea. Ocean levels surged. Glacial lakes burst their walls, sending torrents through valleys that had forgotten the sound of water. Whole ecosystems had to learn how to move again. And yet, amid that chaos, something tender happened. Life returned with an eagerness that defied explanation. Seeds that had slept under ice for centuries sprouted in a single summer. Pollen records show forests expanding northward at a rate faster than modern climate models think possible. Elk, bison, and wolves followed the thaw, carving new paths into virgin soil. In places where glaciers had stood like monuments, fields of flowers rose as if in defiance. The planet, it seemed, wanted to forget the cold. But forgetting has its price. In the archaeological layers that correspond to this warming, there's a strange stillness. Human artifacts become sparse, uneven, hesitant, as if the survivors were relearning the world. The Clovis culture had vanished centuries earlier, erased by the ice. What replaced it was quieter, more cautious. Smaller groups scattered across new frontiers, learning to live with rivers that shifted courses and forests that grew where tundra once lay. The earth had changed its face, and humanity had to rediscover where to place its hands. We think of the end of the Younger Dryas as salvation, the return of warmth, of fertility, of life. But to those alive then, it must have been terrifying. Imagine being born into an age of snow and suddenly finding the sky too bright, the air too wet, the ground too soft. The animals you hunted now fled into forests you did not understand. The rules of the world had changed, and you had no map. Somewhere between fear and adaptation, the first sparks of agriculture appeared. In the Fertile Crescent, near the upper Euphrates, people began to gather and plant wild barley, einkorn, and wheat. The soil, newly fed by meltwater and ash, was fertile beyond memory. It's no coincidence that this happened right after the ice withdrew. The trauma of famine and cold had taught humanity that nature was not a constant. The only way to survive the next collapse was to control it. And so they began to cultivate stability. It was not invention. It was reaction. Archaeobotanists find the earliest grains clustered near settlements that had endured the Younger Dryas droughts. Those people had lived through the collapse of wild ecosystems. When warmth returned, they didn't trust it. They gathered seeds as insurance. Farming was a kind of prayer, a way of anchoring the unstable sky to the soil. It's strange to think that the origins of civilization might lie not in abundance, but in fear of loss. Every great shift in Earth's climate writes itself into the human psyche. The end of the Younger Dryas left a collective scar, the knowledge that the world could vanish overnight. From that wound, culture bloomed. Storage, cooperation, ritual, myth. Humanity, for the first time, began to act as though the future could be shaped. Perhaps that is the real meaning of the return of the green. Not just the end of winter, but the birth of memory. Still, something about the speed of it troubles scientists. Why did the cold end so abruptly? No orbital change or volcanic sequence explains it. The leading theory is that as the ocean circulated again, trapped carbon dioxide escaped, amplifying warmth. But the records suggest an additional trigger. Perhaps the same cosmic rhythm that began the cold in the first place, now swinging back toward equilibrium. It's as if the planet itself remembered how to breathe. Ice core data shows methane levels rising sharply at this time, likely from thawing permafrost and wetlands. Greenhouse feedback turned a glacial echo into a temperate roar. The rapid shift might have looked like resurrection, but it was closer to transformation. The Earth didn't return to what it was. It became something new, and humanity followed. In Anatolia, the same region that once held Göbekli Tepe, people began domesticating sheep and goats. In Jericho, they built stone walls, the first of their kind, not against enemies, but against floods. The rivers had become unpredictable, their courses swollen by meltwater. Each year, they had to rebuild. The world was fertile, but unstable. Civilization was born as a form of defense against abundance. When warmth came back, it did not feel like grace. It felt like aftermath. If the Younger Dryas was the Earth's shudder of death, then the Holocene was its sigh of exhaustion. The planet had learned how fragile balance was. In the centuries that followed, the climate stabilized, unusually stable, almost eerily so. For 10,000 years, temperature variation remained minimal, giving rise to agriculture, cities, and memory. It is within this narrow calm that everything we call history exists. And that calm began the moment the ice released its grip. It's easy to forget that we live in the wake of catastrophe, that our age of warmth is the exception, not the rule. Every breath of temperate air, every green field, every stable season is built on the ashes of the Younger Dryas. The Greenland ice cores mark that turning point with almost supernatural precision. In the span of a few centimeters, mere layers of annual snow, the chemistry changes. Carbon dioxide up, deuterium up, dust down. The line between worlds, preserved in white. If you were to hold that ice in your hands, you'd be touching the moment the planet decided to live again. But was it choice or accident? Did the Earth recover, or did it simply move on? There's a strange melancholy in the idea of survival. When the green returned, so did life, but not the same life. The mammoths were gone. The saber-tooth was gone. The forests grew differently, seeded by winds carrying new pollen. Even the oceans had changed their composition. The warmth we inherited is built atop extinction, and yet, it feels like mercy. The green returned without asking for understanding. It covered the scars quietly, grew over bones, filled the air with oxygen and silence. In that silence, humans found language. We began to sing again. The end of the Younger Dryas was not just the rebirth of nature, but the rebirth of the human voice, the ability to tell the story of what had happened, to give it meaning. Around campfires on newly thawed ground, survivors must have spoken softly of the ice and fire, of the days when the sun disappeared. Perhaps they promised that if the warmth stayed, they would never forget. But memory fades faster than glaciers. We live now in another green age, lush, temperate, generous, and we believe it is normal. But it isn't. It is a reprieve. The same cycles that froze the planet once before are still ticking, hidden in the deep rhythm of orbit, ocean, and magnetism. The same stars still cross our sky. The green will not last forever. It never does. And when it fades again, when the frost returns, we will remember this warmth as they once did, as something too beautiful to have been permanent. Somewhere between the thaw and the flood, humans stopped wandering. The wild herds had moved north with the melting ice, and the grasslands that once fed them had turned to mud and marsh. What had once been predictable was now chaotic. Rivers flooding without warning, seasons shifting too fast to follow. The warmth that replaced the Younger Dryas was not steady. It pulsed, it sweated, it demanded adaptation. And so, for the first time, people began to stay still. At first, it wasn't farming as we know it. It was waiting. Small groups camped near the edges of fertile valleys, gathering seeds from wild barley and emmer wheat. They noticed that where seeds fell from their baskets, new plants grew the following season. Some began to scatter them deliberately. Others dug into soft earth with animal bones to loosen the soil. It was not invention. It was memory made physical. The instinct to secure food before the next freeze. Archaeologists find the first traces of this behavior in the Fertile Crescent. Abu Huraira, Jericho, Moribit. Each began as a cluster of shelters and fire pits on the edge of rivers swollen with the glacial melt. Within centuries, they had turned into settlements. By 9,500 BCE, humans had learned to control fire, water, and time. They had begun to domesticate uncertainty. The tools were simple: flint blades for cutting stalks, woven baskets for storing grain, clay for sealing food against rain. But beneath that simplicity was something revolutionary: the decision to plan for a season not yet born. Agriculture was not just about food. It was about trust in tomorrow. The irony is that the idea of progress may have come from trauma. The Younger Dryas had stripped the world bare. For more than 1,000 years, famine and cold had taught our ancestors that nature could not be relied upon. When warmth returned, they did not see it as safety. They saw it as a temporary mercy. To survive the next collapse, they built systems of control. They learned to tether life to their will, and with that control came permanence. Settlements grew, food surpluses accumulated, and population expanded. The first granaries appeared, stone-walled chambers filled with the harvest. Those chambers were more than storage. They were insurance, protection against the silence that might return. For the first time, survival did not depend on the whims of the world, but on memory. The memory of what the ice had done. Somewhere in that shift, humanity changed its rhythm. The old nomadic time, the rhythm of migration, of following herds, was replaced by seasonal time, measured by planting and harvest. Calendars appeared. Lunar cycles were tracked. The sky was no longer just mystery. It was a clock, And perhaps deep down, a warning system. Because when you live through a catastrophe like the Younger Dryas, the sky never feels neutral again. Every comet, every strange light, every long winter becomes a memory stirred awake. The first astronomers may not have been dreamers. They were watchers, guarding against a recurrence. At Göbekli Tepe, where stone circles recorded constellations, agriculture followed soon after. The same people who carved foxes and vultures into limestone became the first farmers in the region. Some archaeologists believe this is no coincidence, that ritual preceded agriculture, not the other way around. They gathered to remember the catastrophe, and in that gathering, community formed. The act of worship, the collective tending of fire and offering, became the blueprint for tending the land. To plant is to believe in return. It's an act of faith disguised as biology, and faith often begins with fear. The first farmers of memory were not only cultivating food, they were cultivating certainty in an uncertain world. They buried seeds the way they buried the dead, into the dark, trusting in resurrection. As climate stabilized during the Holocene, these early agricultural centers spread outward. From the Levant to the Indus, from the Nile to the Yellow River, the same story unfolded. Ice retreats, floods recede, people settle, plant, and pray. The rhythm repeats like a genetic memory, encoded into the species itself. But something was lost in the stillness. When humans stayed still, their world shrank. They built walls to keep animals out, but also to keep the unknown at bay. The hunter's awareness of the land, the sensitivity to wind, to track, to silence, was replaced by ritual repetition. Civilization was born from a kind of forgetting how to move, yet movement remained within the seasons, within the hands that sowed and reaped. The human story became cyclical, mirroring the planet's own oscillations between ice and warmth. The field replaced the hunt, but the rhythm was the same. Anticipation, pursuit, reward, exhaustion, renewal. Farming was a domesticated version of survival. Even the gods changed shape. The sky gods of the Ice Age, violent, fiery, distant, gave way to earth deities, harvest mothers, fertility spirits. The mythology softened. The divine became soil. The memory of cosmic terror was buried, replaced by gratitude for the sun's return. But in temple carvings and ancient songs, traces of that terror remain. In Sumerian hymns, the goddess Inanna descends to the underworld and returns, symbolizing the cycle of death and rebirth. In Egypt, Osiris is dismembered, buried in the earth, then resurrected as the green of the Nile. Each myth is a seed, each resurrection a metaphor for survival after catastrophe. To plant was to imitate the earth's own renewal, the return of the green after the Younger Dryas. But perhaps unconsciously, it was also to prepare for its reversal. Every harvest was a reminder that abundance could vanish. Every field of grain was an attempt to anchor impermanence. The act of farming turned memory into ritual. Sowing became ceremony. Harvest became proof of divine mercy. Over generations, the purpose was forgotten, and only the rhythm remained. The catastrophe that had birthed agriculture faded into myth. The survivors' children no longer feared the ice because they had never seen it. They feared drought, flood, hunger, but not the sky, until they began to build temples again. At Çatalhöyük, one of the earliest cities, people decorated their walls with horns of wild bulls and painted scenes of eruptions and hunts. Some of those paintings show what looks like a bright disk descending from the heavens, half sun, half comet. The memory persisted. Even as civilization grew over it like grass, farming did more than feed. It created history. Once food could be stored, stories could too. Oral tradition deepened, myths stabilized, knowledge accumulated. And somewhere within that accumulation, the tale of the Great Freeze became the oldest unspoken inheritance of our species. The idea that the world can end and begin again. The first farmers of memory might not have known it, but they were building not only fields, but archives. Each seed was a data point, each harvest a chapter. They turned catastrophe into continuity, and that continuity is what defines us still. We farm the past. We harvest stability from chaos. We build civilizations atop the ruins of weather. But the pattern they began has its own danger. Because when stability lasts long enough, memory fades. When the green endures, the ice becomes myth, and the myth becomes story, and the story becomes disbelief. And that is when the cycle begins again. The earth does not punish, it remembers. The first farmers thought they were creating safety, but what they really created was time. A long pause between catastrophes. A pause we now inhabit. And as we look at our own changing sky, our melting ice, our restless seas, it's worth wondering if we are living at the end of another pause. If the Earth is once again preparing to turn its page. Thousands of years have passed since the ice withdrew. Yet the arguments about why it came and why it left still haunt the minds of those who study the Earth's memory. The Younger Dryas is both too simple and too strange. A sudden cold, a long silence, a rapid thaw. It defies the neat models of gradualism that scientists prefer. It resists every tidy narrative. The debate is not about data anymore. It is about what kind of universe we live in. One ruled by slow and steady laws, or one capable of surprise. In university halls and conference rooms, the questions circle endlessly. Was it meltwater disrupting ocean currents? Was it volcanic aerosols? Was it an airburst of a shattered comet? Was it solar activity? A geomagnetic pulse? A feedback loop of carbon and ice? Each hypothesis has its champions and its skeptics, each armed with graphs, samples, and skepticism. The more evidence emerges, the more the story fractures. Sometimes the truth feels less like discovery and more like resistance. Like the event itself refuses to be understood. When scientists first proposed the comet hypothesis, the reaction was fierce. Journals refused to publish, calling it sensationalist, unprovable. Yet every few years, new papers appear, adding fragments, magnetic spherules here, nanodiamonds there, iridium spikes in unexpected places. Each clue opens a door, but never the same one. The global patterns exist, but they refuse to line up perfectly. It's as if the evidence has been scattered deliberately, as if the past protects its secrets. Others return to the oceans, to the theory of the Great Freshwater Flood. They point to Lake Agassiz, to meltwater pulses that would have shut down the Atlantic circulation. The timing fits neatly, until you look south, to the Andes, where the same cold came without any connection to northern currents. The freeze was global. It cannot be explained by one lake's overflow, volcanic ash layers. None match the date. Orbital cycles. Too slow. Solar minimums. Too weak. Something happened. Something precise, instantaneous, and planetary. But every explanation trembles under the weight of its own logic. Maybe that's why the debate persists. Because the Younger Dryas is not just a question of geology. It's a mirror for our unease. It tells us that even when we think we've tamed nature, the planet still carries within it a pulse that can reset everything. To accept that is to accept our fragility. In 2007, at a geoscience conference in Acapulco, a quiet argument broke out during a coffee break. One researcher, tired of the endless presentation, said, "We're not debating data, we're debating denial." The phrase stuck. He meant that the resistance to catastrophic explanations isn't about evidence, it's about worldview. To admit that the Earth can change in an instant is to dismantle centuries of intellectual safety. Science prefers continuity. Catastrophe feels like myth, but the ice cores do not lie. The isotopes shift too abruptly. The temperature rise at the end of the Younger Dryas, 7 degrees in a decade, defies every gradualist model. You could live your life watching the world transform before your eyes. The horizon softening, glaciers retreating, forests erupting where tundra stood. No slow evolution could do that. Only an event. And yet, even event is the wrong word. An event happens once. The Younger Dryas feels like recurrence, like an echo of something older, something that has happened before and will happen again. Maybe that's why the scientific language fails. It tries to describe a rhythm as an anomaly. When data alone cannot explain, interpretation becomes theater. Labs become battlegrounds of belief. One study confirms a pattern. Another refutes it. Reviewers withdraw their names. Careers hang in balance. Behind every journal abstract lies something almost emotional. The refusal to accept that history might be unstable. In 2013, a paper showing platinum anomalies across North America was quietly retracted, then republished with stronger controls. In 2019, another paper confirmed the same signal in Chile, half a planet away. A few months later, critics called the data statistically insignificant. In 2022, yet another team used new techniques to find the same pattern in Greenland ice. The cycle continues. Discovery, doubt, rediscovery. Like the event itself, the truth flickers in and out of view. It's not just scientists. Even institutions act as though the Younger Dryas is an inconvenient ghost. Museums rarely mention it. Textbooks condense it to a footnote. Climate models treat it as a curiosity. But in the quiet circles of geology and paleoclimatology, everyone knows it was the hinge. The instant that decided what kind of world would follow. If the Younger Dryas hadn't happened, civilization might never have formed. The sudden cold drove humans into cooperation, pushed invention, forced consciousness into foresight. Catastrophe is the root of progress. To erase it from our stories is to forget what made us. Maybe that's the true reason the debate won't end. Because it isn't about evidence, but memory. We're arguing not over what happened, but over how to remember it. Even the instruments seem to feel that uncertainty. Ice cores drilled a century apart show tiny differences in layers, as if the data itself resists exactness. Sediments shift, calibration changes, and every correction opens another doubt. The event seems to hover between realities, both measurable and intangible. Perhaps the Younger Dryas was not one cause, but many converging. A comet airburst, a magnetic fluctuation, a solar pulse, and a meltwater flood, each amplifying the others until the world's equilibrium snapped. Catastrophes rarely come singly. The planet doesn't think in categories. It only responds. And yet, no matter how deep we dig, we find no comfort. The more we understand, the more we realize how narrow the path of stability truly is. For scientists, it's a question of mechanisms. For philosophers, it's a question of meaning. And for all of us, it's a question of time. Because if it happened once without warning, it can happen again. When researchers analyze ancient dust trapped in Antarctic ice, they sometimes find particles of glass older than the event itself. Debris from previous cosmic impacts, Some are tens of thousands of years apart. The pattern feels almost rhythmic. Not a single apocalypse, but a heartbeat of destruction. If the Earth has a pulse, then we are living between beats. The debate will not end because it was never meant to. Every answer only leads to another version of the question. Was it nature or chance? Chaos or design? Accident or pattern? Perhaps the truth lies not in what happened, but in how it keeps returning. And maybe, in some quiet way, the planet prefers it that way. Mystery is its defense mechanism. The scientists still meet, still argue. The younger ones arrive convinced they'll be the ones to solve it. The older ones smile, knowing better. The data is infinite, but the pattern is eternal. Every age needs its mystery to remind it of humility. The Younger Dryas remains ours, a reminder that all stability is temporary, that warmth is borrowed, that knowledge, no matter how precise, can melt as quickly as ice. Perhaps one day we'll agree on what happened, but even then, the Earth will already be writing its next chapter. Quietly, invisibly, beneath the noise of our debate, and by the time we notice, it will already be too late to name it. Every age thinks it is the conclusion of history. We look at our warmth, our architecture of light, our satellites circling the planet, and believe the story has stabilized. But deep below our feet, beneath the green crust of continents and the quiet pulse of oceans, the ice still moves. It sleeps in layers miles thick, breathing so slowly that we forget it is alive. And somewhere within that stillness, the memory of the Younger Dryas still turns, whispering that the calm we inhabit is only an intermission. The Holocene, the temperate interval that followed the Younger Dryas, has lasted barely 10,000 years. In geological time, that's a sigh. Yet it has given us everything: language, agriculture, cities, thought, art. We built entire civilizations upon the assumption that the climate would remain merciful. And so far it has. But even mercy has cycles. Ice is not dead matter. It is patient matter. It waits. When scientists drill into the polar caps, they speak of time as if it were a substance. Each layer of ice is a year, a breath, a heartbeat. The deeper they drill, the older the breath becomes. Beneath 3 kilometers of Greenland's frozen core, they find air older than civilization, still trapped, still shimmering with ghosts of carbon and ash. There, among the bubbles, lies the record of the Younger Dryas. A sudden line, a plunge, a silence, then the recovery, the return of warmth. To hold such ice is to hold the memory of crisis itself. What we learn from that memory is unsettling. The change that ended the Younger Dryas, those 7 degrees of sudden warming, was rapid enough to remake every coastline on Earth. The meltwater-carved valleys, lifted seas, drowned lowlands. It rearranged entire continents. Yet compared to the pace of change today, that ancient shock now looks almost slow. The temperature is rising faster now than it did then. We are accelerating into an unknown the planet has already survived once. Perhaps that is why the Earth feels restless again. The permafrost, once eternal, is thawing. Ice sheets that have endured since the Pleistocene are cracking from below. Ocean currents drift. The same feedback loops that once collapsed the climate are stirring again, but this time from within, not from a comet or solar pulse. The trigger is us. It's tempting to think that because we cause the change, we can control it. But the planet does not negotiate. The forces that ended the Younger Dryas were not evil or benevolent. They were indifferent. When balance tips, the Earth corrects. It always has. The question is whether we understand that correction as catastrophe or renewal. Some scientists call this the Anthropocene, the epoch of human influence. Yet, influence is not dominance. We are not authors of the Earth's narrative. We are its temporary characters. The ice beneath our feet will outlast every city we build. It remembers floods, fires, extinctions. It remembers the mammoth's final breath. It remembers the comet's shadow and the black dust that followed. And now, quietly, it records us. Imagine what future cores will reveal. They will find traces of our world, the soot from our engines, the radiation from our tests, the isotopic signatures of our consumption. They will read it the way we read the Younger Dryas, as a boundary layer, a scar of sudden change. Somewhere far ahead, another civilization, or whatever comes after us, will drill into the ice and wonder what we were and what ended us. Perhaps they will see it as we see the past, not as tragedy, but as inevitability. There's an eerie symmetry in how time folds. The Younger Dryas began when the world grew careless with warmth, when a pulse of meltwater or a burst from the heavens tipped the balance. It ended with another pulse, another correction. Now we stand again in warmth, basking in the illusion of permanence, repeating the rhythm that led to the freeze. The names are different, the agents new, but the cycle is the same. Every feedback loop begins quietly. Methane rising from permafrost, ice darkening with soot, ocean currents slowing under the burden of meltwater. Each change invisible until the sum becomes irreversible. The lesson of the Younger Dryas is not that the planet can freeze. It's that it can change direction faster than we can comprehend. In the field stations of Greenland and Antarctica, researchers describe a sound few outsiders have heard. The cry of ice collapsing miles away. It begins as a crack, then deepens into a roar that rolls across the valley like thunder underwater. It's the sound of ancient pressure releasing, the sound of memory breaking free. They say it feels alive, like the planet exhaling. Maybe the Earth is already preparing its next reset. It's easy to imagine that the story of the Younger Dryas ended with its thaw. But perhaps it was only paused. Perhaps the ice has been waiting, storing its power in silence. The way trees store sunlight in rings. The same feedbacks that began 12,000 years ago are still echoing now. Our warmth may be the echo of that release. We think of ice as the enemy of life, but in truth, it is its archivist. It keeps the record intact, long after the living have forgotten. Every atom of trapped air is a word in a language we are just beginning to translate. In its cold script, the planet speaks of cycles, of patience, of memory. Maybe that's why the story of the Younger Dryas still haunts us. Because it feels unfinished. Because we suspect that history is circular, not linear. That the end of one warmth is always the seed of the next cold. And maybe that is why we build telescopes. Why we send probes to the stars. Not just to escape, but to understand the rhythm of destruction and renewal that governs not only Earth, but everything. Comets still sweep through our skies. The torrid debris stream still crosses our orbit, invisible and indifferent. The universe still moves by the same pulse that once turned our world to ice. We live within that rhythm, pretending it has ended. But even now, beneath our cities and fields, beneath the hum of our power grids, the ice listens. It shifts. It records. It waits. If you walk alone on a glacier at night, you can feel it move beneath you. Slow, deliberate, ancient. The stars above reflect in its surface, the same constellations our ancestors watched when the world froze. The cold hums faintly through the soles of your boots. It feels like time itself breathing. The Earth is not fragile. We are. The planet endures resets, but consciousness does not. Civilizations are as brief as seasons in geological memory. The ice has seen them all, rising and vanishing like tides. And yet, perhaps that is what makes our awareness precious. That we know, that we can listen, that we can choose to remember, even as the planet forgets. The Younger Dryas was a warning disguised as a silence, a reminder that balance is borrowed, that warmth is a lease. We have inherited that lease, and we are spending it fast. One day, the cycle will close again. The winds will change, the ice will reclaim its voice, and the oceans will rise to erase our outlines from the map. And somewhere, far in the future, the first green shoot of the next world will push through the cracks of our forgotten ruins, carrying within it the same defiance that survived the last frost. And the planet, as always, will continue its quiet work of remembering.